Now, in talking about the book this weekend, to really understand it and understand the layout of it, the way it's put together, we almost have to go back a little bit to the beginning of this thing and see what happened to the first people who formed this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and see the information that they had to learn, the way they had to learn it, and what they had to do to apply it in their lives. And I think if we can begin to look at some of the history, we can really begin to understand the book itself. To do so, let's go to the foreword to the second edition. Let's go to the last paragraph on Roman numeral 15. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. Now, we know, of course, that New York stockbroker is this fellow named Bill Wilson. We know the Akron physician is Dr. Bob Smith. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. We'll see later in Bill's story where in the town's hospital he was relieved of his alcoholism through this vital spiritual experience. But we'll see prior to Bill having that experience, he had been visited by the alcoholic friend, and this happened to be a fellow named Ebby Thatcher. Ebby had brought to Bill a couple pieces of information. Ebby had told Bill of the need for a vital spiritual experience in order to recover from the disease of alcoholism. He said, Bill, people like you and I have become absolutely powerless over alcohol. And if we are going to recover, it will have to be a power not only greater than ourselves, but a power greater than human power. And he said, I've been associating with a group of people that told me if I could have a vital spiritual experience, I would be able to find that power and I would be able to overcome my disease. He said also, Bill, those people have given me a practical program of action. And they told me if I would apply that practical program of action in my life, that I could find that vital spiritual experience and I could recover. And he said, look at me, it's been 2 months since I've had a drink. Well, it was evident to Bill that something had taken place in Ebby's life, because he knew Ebby quite well. He knew how Ebby drank, and he knew Ebby was just as powerless over alcohol as he was. So he knew that some power of some form had to have worked in Ebby's life. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now counted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Bill had been placed in the town's hospital as far back as 1933, and Dr. Silkworth had withdrawn him from alcohol, and he had explained to Bill his concept of the disease of alcoholism. He had told Bill, I don't believe this thing is weak will, moral character, or sin, of any of those other things. He said, I believe you have an actual disease, and he said, I believe it's a disease of the body as well as a disease of the mind. He said, I believe people like you have a physical allergy to alcohol, that your body does not react normally to alcohol, and when you take a drink, it seems to trigger a physical craving within your body that makes it virtually impossible for you to stop drinking after you once start. He said, also, I believe people like you have developed the idea of drinking alcohol into an obsession of the mind. And he said, it doesn't make any difference how badly you want to quit drinking. This obsession of the mind always leads you back to the idea of taking the first 1 or 2 drinks. And he said, then you take the first 1 or 2 drinks, you trigger the allergy, and then you can't stop. He said, people like you have a hopeless condition of the mind and of the body. He said, you can't drink successfully because of your body, and you can't quit because of your mind. Now, it was necessary for Bill to know, basically, 3 things. He first had to know the problem, and that's what he had gotten from Dr. Silkworth. He also needed to know a solution to that problem, and that's what had come to him from Ebby, the need for the vital spiritual experience. And he also needed a way to find that vital spiritual experience to overcome the disease that also had been brought to him by Ebby, which was the program of action that Ebby had received from a group of people called the Oxford Groups. So in 1934, Bill Wilson knew three things for the first time in his life. He knew the problem, he knew the solution, and he knew that practical program of action. And our book tells us, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford Groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution of those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. Now, based on that program of action, in the Towns Hospital, Bill had applied this thing in his life, and he had had what he always called a vital spiritual experience and had recovered. As soon as he got out of the Towns Hospital, he began to work with other drunks in New York City. And he probably did the same thing most of us do in the beginning. He probably jerked them off the bar stools and seined them up out of the gutters and tried to make everybody take it, and none of them seemed to want it. And none of them seemed to respond to him at all. And one day, while back in the Towns Hospital, visiting with another alcoholic, he ran into Dr. Silkworth and told him that he'd been trying to help other alcoholics, but none seemed to be interested. What was he doing wrong? And the doctor said, Bill, you're probably trying to cram that great spiritual experience, that white flash you had here in the Towns Hospital, down their throat. And he said, you don't cram anything down the throat of an alcoholic. He'll just vomit it right back up every time. He said, why don't you tell them what I told you? He said, every alcoholic that I know wants to know two things. One, why can't I drink like I used to without getting drunk? Two, why can't I quit now that I want to quit? And he said, if you will explain that to them, you will get their attention. Talk to them about the hopeless condition of the mind and of the body. Explain to them what the problem really is. Now, prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he'd succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic, and that alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. And we know, of course, that Bill went to Akron not to save Dr. Bob, but Bill went there to take over a company. You know, we call Bill a stockbroker. I think it's a real fine, nice term for him. Bill was a real alcoholic. He, just like all the rest of us, he was a stock speculator. Bill was a stock trader. Bill was real good at taking other people's money and making money for both him and them. And he was always putting some kind of deal together. Now, this particular deal in Akron, they were going to take over a company through a proxy fight. Bill's going to get to be the president of the company. Now, this is the middle of the Depression. Nobody's got any money, but that really doesn't make any difference. We're going to do it anyhow. And, of course, we know while there the deal fell through. Bill was in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, very low, very sad, very depressed, counted his money, realized he didn't even have enough money to pay the hotel bill, and he happened to look through a door off of the lobby into the bar, and then the lights were low, and the music was playing, and I imagine the smoke was thick, and people were laughing, and Bill said, I believe I'll go in there and have a soda, and I'll be with people of my kind. I won't take a drink. But as he started to go in there, his mind probably for the first time said, Bill, you can't do that. If you go in there, you're going to get drunk. So in desperation, Bill remembered how back in New York City, even though he had never helped anybody, when he tried, he felt better. So through some phone calls, he came in contact with Dr. Bob. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. To Bill's amazement, he found that Dr. Bob had already been going to these people called the Oxford Groups, and that he'd been trying to apply their practical program of action in his life, and he'd been trying to find a power greater than human power. But he had never been able to apply it to the depth necessary to recover because he didn't know what was wrong with him. He thought it was weak will. He thought it was moral character. He thought it was sin. And why would he not? That's what everybody had told him, and that was the popular belief in that particular time. Bill sits down with him and explains to him the exact nature of his illness. This may be one of the first miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. How this old broken down, speculating, conning New York City stock trader could sit down with a well-trained surgeon and explain to the surgeon what was wrong with his mind and his body. Normally the surgeon would have said, "Who in the hell are you to be telling me, you know?" But doctor, the message had such depth and interest that Dr. Bob bought into it almost immediately. He said when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. Now he did have to have one more drunk before he finally sobered up. But this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Hence the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. Now we're in the middle of the summer of 1935. We have 3 people who have learned 3 pieces of information. All 3 of them know what the problem is, the actual disease. All 3 of them know what the solution is, a vital spiritual experience. All 3 of them know a practical program of action to find that experience. And all 3 had applied it in their lives, and they had had what they called a vital spiritual experience. They had recovered from a hopeless condition of the mind and of the body, and they were all 3 staying sober. The third man, we see that picture in AA rooms all over the world, the man on the bed. Bill and Bob sitting down talking to Bill Dotson and telling Bill Dotson what his problem really is, what his solution is, and what his program of action should be. 2 days later, Dotson said to his wife, "Get my clothes, I'm going home." He got up, went home, applied the program, never took another drink as long as he lived.